There's something all defeated men share. And you probably don't realize it when you're doing it. Machiavelli observed this pattern for decades, saw the same mistakes destroy kings, princes, and common men. And most disturbing? These men were sure they were being strong. Have you ever wondered why some men, even though they have everything to win, end up losing? Why do seemingly intelligent people make obviously destructive decisions? Machiavelli spent his life studying this, and he discovered something shocking. Weakness never announces itself. It arrives disguised as virtue, integrity, and doing the right thing. And the most dangerous men are those who mistake these masks for real strength. In 500 years of history, since Machiavelli wrote his observations, the patterns remain identical. Same errors, same justifications, same devastating consequences. The question isn't whether you know weak men. It's whether you can recognize when you're being one. The first trait that destroys competent men is mistaking information for wisdom. Pier Soderini was the kind of man who impressed anyone in conversation. He knew history, philosophy, and political economy. When he became ruler of Florence, everyone expected greatness. Machiavelli, as his advisor, saw something terrible happening. Soderini had all the information on his enemies. He knew Cesare Borgia was a threat. He knew the Medici's plans. He had detailed reports on every conspiracy. But information without action is just entertainment for the ego. He accumulated reports, analyzed scenarios, and discussed strategies in endless meetings. Meanwhile, his enemies simply acted. When he finally decided to react, he found the doors already closed. He was exiled, humiliated, forgotten. You do this now. You research obsessively before investing. You analyze every detail of a relationship before committing. You study every possibility of a decision until it no longer makes sense. Knowledge protects you from reality. Number does it paralyze you. The second trait is even more destructive, transforming virtue into strategic prison. Girolamo Savonarola was pure, incorruptible, upright. When he assumed spiritual control of Florence, he promised to create a perfect society. The people adored him. His sermons filled the cathedrals. He had absolute power, but his virtue became his straitjacket. He refused to negotiate with adversaries because he was impure. He rejected pragmatic alliances because they violated his principles. When the Pope threatened him, he remained unyielding because God was on his side. He was burned to death in a public square. Machiavelli recognized the pattern. Men who confuse moral rigidity with strength of character, who prefer to be right and dead rather than alive and effective. This is what virtuous narcissism is, believing that your pure intentions protect you from people with dirty intentions. It doesn't protect. It marks you as a target. When you publicly proclaim your virtue, you telegraph your limitations. Any intelligent adversary will know exactly how to manipulate you. The third trait is devastating. Be predictable like a broken clock. Francesco Guicciardini was a brilliant man, but he had obvious patterns. When attacked, he always retaliated in the same way. When praised, he always lowered his guard. When pressured, he always retreated to the same defensive strategy. His opponents learned to play him like an instrument. Did they want him to attack? Did they insult his honor? Did they need him to back down? Did they apply economic pressure? Did they want him to lower his guard? Did they offer empty compliments? Guicciardini believed he was being strategic. In reality, he was being manipulated. Predictability is strategic death. When your patterns become known, you lose any advantage. Think about the last time someone pissed you off. How did they figure out exactly what to say to get you off? It wasn't an accident. It was a recognized and exploited pattern. I'm the kind of person who becomes a prison. The man who always tells the truth will be kept. The one who always forgives will be betrayed. The one who always reacts will be provoked. Your enemies don't need to be stronger than you. They just need to know you better than you know yourself. But the fourth trait is even more dangerous. The suicidal obsession with justice. Piero de' Medici held all the cards to maintain power in Florence. Money, influence, popular support. When his enemies attacked him with false accusations, he made a fatal mistake. He decided to prove his innocence through official channels. He spent months gathering evidence. He organized witnesses. He prepared an impeccable defense. Meanwhile, their adversaries consolidated power, bought allies, and spread more lies. When he finally presented his brilliant defense, there was no one left willing to listen. He was exiled not because he was guilty, but because he believed that the truth would save him. Machiavelli saw this pattern countless times. Powerful men destroyed by their obsession with proving themselves right. Justice is a luxury that only the victorious can afford. When you're being attacked, your priority shouldn't be proving your innocence. It should be neutralizing the threat. How many people do you know who have ruined their careers because they needed to prove a point? Who have spent years in legal battles that could have been avoided with pragmatic negotiation? The vice of justice makes you fight unnecessary battles, while less scrupulous adversaries reorganize the battlefield. And that brings us to the fifth trait: perfectionism as disguised cowardice. Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de' Medici had the perfect opportunity to take control of Florence in 1494. The city was in chaos. His rivals weakened. The people looked for leadership, but Lorenzo hesitated. I wanted to ensure that every alliance was solid, every detail planned, every risk calculated. While analyzing scenarios, Savonarola assumed the power vacuum. When Lorenzo finally decided to act, he found the doors closed. Perfectionism is cowardice disguised as virtue. When you demand perfect conditions to act, you're looking for an excuse not to act. Perfect conditions don't exist. Complete information is an illusion. Total security is a fantasy. Every decisive moment in history has been made by people working with incomplete information, limited resources, and uncertain scenarios. You do this now. You put off the difficult conversation until you have the perfect words. You avoid investing until you're absolutely certain. You postpone the relationship until you're completely ready. Meanwhile, less qualified people make the decisions, make the moves, and take the positions that could be theirs. The world doesn't reward the most prepared. It rewards those who act first with sufficient competence. And the sixth trait is devastating. What Machiavelli observed empirically, we can now measure neurologically, explains a neuroscientist at Harvard University. People who consistently avoid difficult decisions develop fewer neural connections in the region responsible for assertiveness. A behavioral psychologist with 20 years of experience confirms, when someone repeatedly acts weakly, they're not just making bad choices. They're literally training their brain to see the world through the lens of powerlessness. According to a Stanford University study, our brain rebuilds itself based on the behavior patterns we repeat. Weakness, over time, becomes not just behavioral, but neurological. Slavery by consistency. Giuliano della Rovere hated the Borgias. He was known for it. He built his entire political identity around this rivalry. When he became Pope Julius II, everyone expected him to destroy any legacy of Alexander VI. But Giuliano did something unexpected. He maintained several Borgia policies that worked. He preserved alliances forged by his mortal enemies. He adapted strategies he had publicly criticized. His contemporaries were scandalized. How could he be so inconsistent? Machiavelli admired the Pope's strategic flexibility. He had understood something fundamental. Coherence is a luxury for philosophers, not for effective leaders. The world changes. Circumstances shift. New information emerges. Those who refuse to adapt principles to changing realities are choosing ideological purity over practical effectiveness. You see this all the time. The CEO who sticks with failed strategies because they were his trademark. The politician who votes against sensible proposals because they contradict past rhetoric. The slavery of coherence prevents you from evolving, forces you to defend territories that no longer matter. Strategic flexibility isn't a lack of character, it's adaptive intelligence. The seventh feature is particularly modern, sacrificing strategy to be accepted by the group. Cesare Borgia faced a brutal choice in 1503. His captains, men who had served him faithfully, began to conspire against him. Most leaders would choose a middle ground. They would punish some, forgive others, and try to keep the group united. Cesare did something different. He pretended to forgive everyone. He organized a reconciliation party in Senegalia. When the traitors arrived unarmed, trusting in his clemency, he executed them simultaneously. In a single night, he eliminated the threat and sent a crystal-clear message to future conspirators. Fear of being alone destroys more careers than incompetence. Competent people make terrible decisions because they can't stand losing group approval. You do this constantly. You agree with decisions you know are wrong to avoid being excluded. You avoid confronting destructive behavior to maintain harmony. Real leadership requires strategic solitude, moments when you have to choose between being popular and being right. Cesare understood that respect is built through difficult decisions, not easy consensus. The eighth line is a dangerous illusion, believing that intentions matter more than results. When Machiavelli advised the Florentine Republic on mercenaries, his recommendation was clear. Create a citizen army. Abandon hired soldiers with no real loyalty. The rulers rejected the advice, not because they disagreed with its logic, but because hiring mercenaries seemed more humane. It avoided putting citizens at risk and demonstrated that they were compassionate leaders. 5 years later, when Charles VIII invaded Italy, the Florentine mercenaries fled without a fight. The city was sacked. Thousands died. The rulers consoled themselves by remembering their good intentions. Morality without effectiveness is just narcissism in disguise. The father who undermines his children's discipline because he doesn't want to be authoritarian. The boss who avoids giving honest feedback because he doesn't want to hurt. The friend who lends money to drug addicts because he wants to help. Everyone feels morally superior as they produce exactly the results they say they want to avoid. The illusion of moral control convinces you that pure intentions absolve terrible results. They don't absolve you. They make you an accomplice. The ninth trait is devastating. Transparency as a strategic vulnerability. Francesco Pazzi was not killed by swords. He was killed by words. In 1478, he planned to overthrow the Medici through the famous Pazzi conspiracy. The plan was sophisticated, the allies powerful, the timing perfect, but Pazzi had a fatal weakness. He could not keep secrets from those close to him. He confided in his brothers. He revealed details to his cousins. He shared his anxieties with close friends. Each confidence seemed harmless, until one of these intimate people betrayed their trust. Lorenzo de' Medici learned of the plans 3 days before the execution. The conspiracy turned into a massacre. Pazzi was hanged naked from the window of the Palazzo Vecchio. Total transparency is strategic, naivete disguised as virtue. When you reveal everything about yourself, you're handing over ammunition for future conflicts. You operate within this destructive logic constantly. You tell colleagues about your career plans. You reveal your marital tensions to friends. You share your financial difficulties with acquaintances. You think you're building intimacy. In reality, you're distributing weapons. Selective honesty isn't hypocrisy, it's intelligent self-preservation. And that brings us to the 10th and final trait, the deadly arrogance of kindness. When Machiavelli died in 1527, his funeral was a perfect demonstration of this delusion. Men who had betrayed him, lied to him, conspired against him, appeared mourning his passing. They spoke of his kindness, generosity, loyalty. Machiavelli himself would have laughed at the irony. The arrogance of kindness is believing that your virtues exempt you from the rules of the human game. That being morally superior protects you from morally inferior people. Piero Soderini believed this. Francesco Valori believed it too. Girolamo Savonarola died believing this. All were destroyed, not in spite of their goodness, but because of it. Kindness without strategic intelligence is just well-intentioned vulnerability. The boss you've always defended will fire you without hesitation if it serves their interests. The friend you lent money to will disappear when you need to pay it back. Not because they're monsters, because they're human. And humans prioritize self-interest over abstract gratitude. But here's what's truly disturbing about these observations of Machiavelli. They weren't prescriptions. They were warnings. He wasn't teaching men to be weak. He was warning about how weakness masquerades as virtue and destroys intelligent lives. And the question he asked, and which remains unanswered for most people, is this: how many of these traits do you recognize in yourself? And more importantly, do you have the courage to do something about it? Because acknowledging this is only the first step. The next step requires something that weak men, by definition, lack: the courage to change patterns that have become their identity. So what did Machiavelli really teach us about weakness? That it is not destiny, It is choice. A choice that repeats itself until it becomes character. A character that crystallizes until it becomes destiny. But if it is a choice, it can be changed. The question is, will you continue to hide behind these masks of virtue? Will you continue to call your cowardice prudence, your paralysis analysis, your weakness kindness? Or will you have the brutal honesty to look in the mirror and acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, you spent years being exactly the kind of man Machiavelli saw destroyed over and over again? The choice, as always, is individual. It always has been. But remember, the time you spend justifying yourself is time your competitors are using to overtake you. And they're not wasting time on these comforting illusions. They are simply winning.